love putting things together in new ways. I love coming up with new things, new ideas to put together in new ways. You know, this whole podcast actually is about trying to look at being, life, and consciousness in some new ways, to try to just look at it from a different perspective, imaginative ways. Turns out, in my study this week, the human brain is literally built for imagination. Look around you. Everything that's not, a rock or natural or growing naturally, what is it? It's a product of our human imagination. Cars, trains, planes, every kitchen appliance, our homes, TVs, all of technology, from the written word to social media, all from a great imagination. The integral step before creation. Everything grows there. It grows there. Wow. What a trip this is. So today we're gonna go into the imagination. Some say that Jesus will save us. Some say Buddha or this religion or that religion. But in my deepest heart, I see our salvation in the imagination and the curiosity that drives it. Now, the meaning is basically the power of imagination is the power to form mental images of something not present or has never been seen before. If you go to Wikipedia, imagination is the production or simulation of novel objects, sensations, and ideas in the mind without any immediate input of the senses. I love that. And if you look at the history of the study, basically imagination falls into two categories. The synthetic, this is where ideas that are already there are reorganized and put in new ways. And then there's the creative. This is where the new happens. I'll tell you, some of the creatures on the sci-fi and fantasy stuff these days, my gosh, talk about an imagination. Holy mackerel. I've known a couple artists. Where do they come up with this stuff? The imagination. To say the very least, the imagination is integral to everything we say or do. Human life on earth literally lives in a bubble of creative imagination. It's an amazing thing. You know, apple trees make apples. Orange trees make oranges. Human trees, we create worlds, environments. All of this that we're living in, and I'm sitting in a studio that's just surrounded by art and technology and instruments. All of it is the fruit of something that lived inside of us and came out, and now we live inside of it. So today, I want to bless our imaginations and curiosity and the curiosity that drives it. I want to recognize right up front, there's a dark side. You know, we make TNT and then come up with Nobel Prizes regarding it. We make up atomic bombs. We find new creative ways to be at war. Yes, but today, I want to discuss how rich we are with our imaginations, with who we are and what we are, and how this capacity to turn things into something new. You know, I can't remember who said it. I think it was Fred Alan Wolf, who's a physicist. He said, we are God's growing edge. We are the growing edge of the universe. The universe has done a whole lot to create, and we are now the creation tree of the universe. That doesn't mean the universe stopped creating, but it does mean that we're doing something amazing, and it has to do with our imaginations. So I'm going to get our input from my co-hosts. Bob Hayes is coming to us from Florida. Mary Ann is coming from Spokane Valley, Washington. My name is Red Hawk, and I'm here in Spokane. And we're just trying to dance with the mystery in a way that allows us and our imaginations to grow and to reach. And these conversations are really about that. So, Bob, I'm going to turn it over to you first. What say you with this imagination?
Well, certainly agree with everything you've been saying. Um, Psychologists have studied imagination primarily as a subset of their study of creativity. And you really can't separate the two, because if you're going to create something, you got to think about it first. And so I would almost call them synonyms. But the one major thing that has come out of a lot of different studies is that creativity really happens when you turn yourself off, when you're in a relaxed state, when you're not worrying about something. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have to prepare for it. That's another stage of creativity. And it's almost like you build a structure of sorts, and then the universe hands you the fuel or the electricity that zaps into that structure that you created, and suddenly you're able to manipulate it and see it in new ways. But if you're not open to that energy from the universe, you're not going to be able to activate your imagination.
Yeah, and I want to say that whether you create or not, you have an imagination, and that's what I really want to talk about, is this capacity. The fruit, everybody, not everybody has fruit. I know some people who, they tie bugs for fly fishing. That's the extent of their creativity. I don't think you need to manifest it in order to see it and to see how rich we are living in it. And that's really where I want to kind of keep us focused on a little bit, because not everybody has fruit. I know I've got a lot of songs. I got files and files of songs that never made it to the fruit. It died on the vine. Marianne, what do you say about this imagination, this faculty we have that, I'll be honest, it won't really stop. It just keeps going.
Well, I would say that as I sit here imagining what I'm going to say, I would think that our imaginations, I think they're innate, and they're tied to thinking. And, last week we talked about that inner dialogue that we have. And I think that our imaginations, you talked about how everything out here in the world is here because somebody imagined it first. I still stand on a bridge and think about the first person that imagined creating a structure to go over the river instead of having to try to go across the river by boat or walking. And then it's for everything to be here, someone had to imagine it first. And whether that concept ever makes it into reality, I think that it does, and maybe not from the person that imagined it, but if we're all connected, I think it gets picked up, because we see that there are things that happen simultaneously around the world where different people in different places come up with the same thing or create the same thing. And I think that our imaginations are tied to reality. I've been doing a little bit of studying right now on guided imagery and the power of using guided imagery in order to create something that we want to have happen. And the studies that have happened on just with sports teams, where a football team is using guided imagery, and they go from being the last in place in their field or in their stats to first, just by imagining that they can accomplish something. And so I think our imaginations are much more important than we give it credit for. So the one thing is that problem solving, we see a problem that needs to be solved and we start to imagine a way to fix it, and that creativity that comes out of that. But then there's also the fantasy, where we start to imagine things that kind of how we wish they would be rather than the way they are. And, you talked about that with some of the sci-fi and some of these creatures. And I just saw Avatar, The Way of the Water. And, some of the the imagination that went into that, and imagining a world that could be different than the one we're in. And I think that's first. That comes first, because if we can't imagine it, we can't create it. So.
Amen. And I think, Bob, you said one thing that really is compelling, and that's that relaxed state. It lets it happen. And this is the piece I want us to get. We can't turn it off. You know, even if you're not a creator, all right? If you live in a family, you look around your home, it's you. There's no other home that looks like that. That comes out of you and your spouse's imagination, or your imagination, or there. It's really interesting how we put our little homes together, how a house becomes a home by what we hang on the walls, by the music we play, the shows we watch. And I think all of that is imagination too. And I guess what I want our listeners to see is that this is already happening. It's, you know, we've talked about the drives and all this other stuff. This is already happening in you. And how do you get out of the way and let it happen? I think, Bob, tell me, Bob, how do we do that?
That's really the key. And you know, and different people do it different ways. Willie Nelson says that his songs come to him when he's out alone driving. Other people have said they get their best ideas when they're in the shower. Other people do it when they're working out. The old adage of chopping wood and carrying water. When you can turn off the inner dialogue, if you will, and just be open to whatever experiences happen to come to you without judging them. That's a very Zen-like approach, where you just let the experience flow through you and with you, and at the end of that experience, suddenly you're having new thoughts, you're perceiving new patterns, and that is the secret. But it's not the same for everybody. Everybody's got to find their own way of opening up.
Well, you know what you just said was like, yes, you start to see things that you didn't see before, and I think that relaxed state is key. Because when we're anxious or we're worried or we're fearful, we miss all of that. And I think everybody finds it their own way. You're right.
Well, and it doesn't have to be loud. In other words,
No.
You know, I don't know anybody who could be a householder that hasn't used their imagination. You know, I need a new water heater. Man, I don't have any. How the heck am I going to do that? I don't have any money. And all of a sudden, your imagination starts reaching in new ways. You start creating opportunities for yourself to get that water heater, or maybe, you know, whatever it is that it is. But I think that it's impossible to not be engaged intentionally in your imagination if you're a householder. I'll tell you, if you're a house renter, it doesn't matter. If you're keeping a home up, paying your bills, going to work, there is no way you can do any of that without this imagination piece. And I'll be honest, I like my imagination because I get bored easy, and I like to come up with new ways of looking at things, following the associations. My daughter rides the bus. She used to drive to work, but now she says it's so much nicer. You know, your mind can go. You can see the city. You know, all these different ways that can prompt your imagination. And I think that, Bob, one of the things you said is, you know, it's about how do you steer your openness? Where do you go to get that? Willie Nelson might be in the car. I think of the White Album. They say came out of the Beatles learning to meditate. And that they all became super creative because they got out of the way and they weren't all messed up and everything. I know my sister teaches meditation in inner city schools. She did that for 20 years. And in every school that they taught meditation, the GPA went up. Is that right? The grades went up. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, boy, am I getting old, man. It's like, was that the gross national product? No, that's another. Anyway, I think that the imagination is one of the empowering human tools. And how we use it and where we use it is probably based on where we are and where we want to be. And I think that those two things engage in an imaginative thing. I'll tell you, I never thought of going to divinity school. That wasn't my idea. I was coming out of a church one time in college, and the minister took me aside, and after everybody left, he took me to his office, and he gave me 2 applications to divinity school. And I burst out laughing. But once the idea was planted, my imagination did something with it. Wow, you mean I could take these courses? I could study under Joseph Campbell? I didn't, by the way. My mind was going in every direction, and all those directions helped direct me. And I think that that's what I want our listeners to see, that your imagination is empowering, and please, don't underestimate it. Like Marianne said, it's very underestimated because it's always there, and we don't play it in a way that is always good for ourselves and the world.
Yeah, I think that is key, that we are always using it, whether we realize it or not. And there is a result that comes out of it. Our actions, whatever we do, comes out of what we're imagining. And I love that you said about, somebody plants a seed, and then there's a part of you that emerges from that seed that got planted. And it's because you start to imagine yourself in different ways. And as we emerge from this, we start to figure out, oh, well, let's see, this is not me. I don't think I ever want to do that again. Or I think this is where I'm going. And I don't know. I just think that it starts with our imagination. And everything starts with what it is that we can see for ourselves. You could have shut that down and said, I could never, ever go to divinity school.
Well, I actually did. I've stuck them in a drawer for another year and a half.
Exactly, right. But you pulled it back out because you started to imagine it again. And so I think that's the key to imagination. We can put it in a drawer. We can shut it down. Or we can, see where it goes.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But I think
that takes faith.
There's a really important interaction that's going on between your imagination and your existence in the world, and what's going on in your journey. You said it. If that guy hadn't have pulled you aside and gave you those applications, then it might have just been a thought that never went anywhere. And so as we're moving along our life path, it's those interactions between what opportunities are open to us and what our imaginative creativity does with those opportunities. And it's a chicken and the egg kind of a thing. But and I just wanted to mention one other thing. Marianne mentioned how the same ideas can be generated at the same time by different people around the world. And that gets into a whole idea of what has been called morphic fields. How when one person has an idea, it changes the field of the whole planet so that it's more likely that someone else will have that idea. There's been a lot of studies in that area. Yeah. So, when we start talking about something about imagination, we got to remember that our imagination is connecting us to the universe from our inner self and our outer self, just like everything else.
Yeah,
it's all part of that big matrix.
As you were talking, Bob, I was thinking of that Escher print where he's got one hand drawing the other hand coming out of each other, and that the imagination is the growing edge of the universe. Again, I tried to state that in an earlier statement, and I really believe that that's the truth, that what's going on in the top of our heads, neocortex, and I can't remember, the thalamus, I think is what it is, they are interacting and putting things together and coming up with new things to put together. You look at the different the toys that made America, the technologies that made America. Look at TV. Look how Marconi couldn't pull off what he wanted to pull off in Italy, and so he came to the United States. And what did he do? We got radio. It was a long journey. And something you said, Marianne, scenarios. The imagination is running scenarios all the freaking time. My future, those applications I got. Would I have ever thought of divinity school? I don't know. But it feels like something, like the piece of sand that a pearl is made around. Something was grating my soul at a deeper level. And my imagination made something of it till finally it caused me to move. And I think that one of imagination's greatest assets is it compels us to move, to do something. And Bob, we're back down to the creation now that I tried to keep us separate from, but it's not working too good.
Yeah. But, again, imagination is only useful if it has something fertile. That seed has to be planted in ground that has been tilled and fertilized and made ready. Else, it's not going to blossom. How many metaphors did I mix there?
Well, but that is so true. And sometimes you get an imaginative thought and you stick it in the drawer for a year because you need to till the soil. You need to get yourself ready to be able to make that happen. And so I think that's so true. It's, you have to.
But you can't sit back and expect some wonderful imaginative thought to suddenly change your life. You have to be proactive about it also.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's where the imagination and our thoughts are critical to be able to motivate us to move, to be able to motivate us to do something, to imagine something different than the circumstances that we're in right now, right?
Yeah.
And then you get motivated. So maybe motivation's another piece of this. And where does that come from? Because it's easy to kind of just maybe kick back and go, oh, yeah, I can imagine this greater thing, but it's too much work.
Well,
right?
In just about everything I've read about script writing and writing in general is, by the way, I've tried to script write and I suck at it, so I'll just confess that. But if you don't believe that the human family absolutely needs what you have to write about, don't write it. That every writer believes that their stuff is going to change the world. It's important to the world. And I think that that's a huge piece of the way imagination works, is how does it ground itself? How does it root itself? I think of the Steve Jobs of the world. What happened, that caused his imagination to not just run wild, but to ground itself, root itself in the real, if you will. And this technology we're using to Zoom this meeting, it's all derivative of some of the stuff that the Microsofts and the Apples of the world created. A lot of the virtual and computer generated imagery and all that, where does it come from? It comes from a crossbreed of technology and art. Again, if you saw Way of the Water, come on, man. How can anybody create that? That's blows my mind. Is where does this stuff come from? And now we're back to quantum tunneling and all kinds of stuff of where the really new stuff of imagination comes from.
How about the difference between an individual's imagination and a group's imagination?
Yes.
Because, you talk about Avatar, there's probably 150 or more people that were directly involved in imagining how that movie was going to happen. Disney didn't call his people engineers; he called them Imagineers. And
Wow, yeah.
it's always a group effort to get beyond. Even if it's your kernel of an idea, you're going to have to interact with other people and their imaginations to make anything of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was going to say the same exact thing, because there's nothing that we do alone. And yes, you might have that spark of imagination, but there have to be other things that happen. The universe collaborating with you, through other people, through coincidences and circumstances. And like Steve Jobs, he didn't do that alone. He may be attached to that idea, but there was a whole lot of people involved in that. And the same thing with any creative endeavor.
Yeah.
It's a collaboration.
Well, and now we're back to what I would call the root idea. And this is where patents and things come from. Whoever has the root idea is going to be the real winner. And if you look at on TV, on the History Channel, the toys that made America, just the creativity and the process that one took. The one that amazed me most is this woman, her husband died, and she's trying to keep her household up, and one of her maids pisses her off because the china keeps getting chipped. And so the woman ends up not letting anybody else touch her china except her, and it still got chipped. So she said, I got to figure a way to clean this. That's where the dishwasher came from. This woman had the root idea, patented it, and then once she patented it, what happened? Whoa, it took off. Everybody wanted a piece of the action to make it better and better. And I think you all are making the point that Cameron might have had the idea of, some of these movies like Avatar and stuff like that, but it takes, and I'm going to even say thousands, because when you get into wardrobe, when you get into the technology of how do you create these creatures and make them real, the 3D, he invented a whole new camera for the 3D effect. So over and over, we see a couple things. One, and I think you all nailed it, once you have a root idea, it goes. It takes, and hundreds and thousands of people can be part of it. And if you don't believe that, just Google the top 10 defense contractors in this country and look at what they do. Talk about Imagineers in the name of the dark.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah. Well, I think that's such a good point, too, but because when you think about Cameron, all these people are involved, but he was the director. So he's the one that made those final decisions. So there is an autonomy, too, to some of these things that go out there, what it is that we do personally and how we express those collaborative efforts. And they do come through individuals.
Amen.
So
I think what you're getting at is the essence of leadership. The ability to take one's own idea and then recognize people who have their own ideas and harness them together. And then suddenly you're all pulling together toward this one idea. And the leader is one who's able to recognize which people to get involved, how to best use their skills, and how to harness their ideas to help move his or her own idea forward.
Amen. And on that note, Marianne, final comments?
oh my gosh. I just think that the imagination is a rich source of it. I think it's one of the most important pieces of our lives, and that we should appreciate it. We should exercise it, and we should listen when we get imaginative nudges and follow through.
Amen. Bob, final comments?
Well, I think that the imagination is one of the major factors that makes us humans. And we've talked about how human self-awareness separates us from nature and so forth. I think imagination relinks us to nature if we can look at it in the right way and open ourselves up to it in the right way. So we're becoming more human and we're becoming more connected.
Amen. And that's a beautiful way of ending that. And, where do we go? Well, I should have just cut Bob off his previous statement when he talked about leadership. Because the fact is, if we can't pull this stuff together and make it real, there's two ways of going at things today with leadership. One is caring for the people, making sure everybody gets fed, has housing, a job, education, meaningfulness, all that stuff. The other way is figuring you need to have people with enough of that to keep you in power. So you see, there's different ways of leadership. There's different ways of approaching this. It's not about, making sure you have enough people with that so you can stay in power. It's about using your power to keep everybody in an imaginative state so that they can be real and alive and vital to the culture and the community in which they're a part. Leadership. It's an amazing thing. And I have to say, I've probably learned more about leadership from my wife and going to the parties and seeing the people that she hires and that work for her and how they connect. Wow. Leadership. We hope that you've got some more imaginative ways of seeing the world. And finally, we hope we'll see us next week for leadership.